So thank you, Carol, for taking time out today for our conversation, and I'm really excited to dive into learning from you about your experience.
Great to be here.
So, Carol, why don't you take us through the journey you've had as a coach, as a leader, as a professional working with leaders? How did you start? Where are you? What's your practice like as a coach?
Right, okay. So I am an executive career leadership coach, a coaching psychologist, and my journey started probably when I was a leader myself in an organization, and coaching was an add-on to what I did. And in 2011, the organization that I worked in was going through a big restructure. I worked in the for the Her Majesty's, well, it's His Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Service now, which is part of the Ministry of Justice. And I was what was called the group court manager. And the organisation was going through a big restructure in 2011. My role as a group court manager was being deleted, and I could have been redeployed into another part of the organisation. But I saw it as an opportunity to do something different and to do something that I loved. And when I thought about what it was that I wanted to do next, coaching had always been an add-on to what I did as a leader, and I loved working with people who lacked belief in themselves and supporting them to go on and develop that self-belief, and that with that came the confidence, and then seeing them go on and achieve things that they never thought they could achieve, even if it meant them leaving the organization. So I decided that I was going to take voluntary redundancy. I did a master's in coaching psychology and I started my coaching business. And initially, I was coaching women who were going through midlife career change, because at the time that's what my research was in. I had made a midlife career change and I was attracting a lot of women of a similar age that were making that sort of a career transition. Then I started getting younger women coming to me, telling me that, well, they've got challenges, but they're not midlife yet. And so I started working with them. And I was working with women who were leaders, women who wanted to go into leadership roles, women who wanted to exit employment and start their own businesses. And I began to recognize that my marketing messages are becoming quite diluted because I was serving such a wide range of women. And so then I decided to focus on women who were leaders in the corporate environment because that was my background. And then as time went on, and I started to reflect on the kind of leaders that I'd coached and who my coaching clients were, and I recognized that a lot of them are introverted, and I'm
Mm.
introverted myself. And then I started writing articles on LinkedIn and publishing them there about the challenges that introverted leaders face in the workplace, particularly women. And I got bombarded with messages, emails, people commenting on my posts and articles, sharing their experiences with me about the challenges that they face. And I began to recognize that this is a big, big problem. And so I decided to make that my area of speciality, and specialize in introverted leaders, particularly introverted women leaders. And I wrote a book about it called Quietly Visible. I did a TEDx talk called Introverts Make Great Leaders Too. And so that has sort of led me to where I am today. A couple of years ago, I did a master's in psychology, and my research looked at how introverted women leaders experience belonging and psychological safety in the workplace. And
Mm.
that is as a result of the research that I've done. My work is kind of evolving to look at belonging and psychological safety more broadly and how that impacts people in the workplace.
Interesting journey, Carol. Interesting journey. Uh, and I'm very curious to hear about belonging and psychological safety at workplace. But I think before that, I want to move back into our conversation and talk about introverted leaders that you speak
Hmm.
about, you work with. Why specifically introverted leaders? So I understand you were getting a lot of messages and inquiry and you
Hmm.
chose to make that as your specialization. What's your learning? What's your finding? Talk to me a little bit more about
Yeah.
introverted leaders.
Yeah, because the workplace is very much favored towards extroversion. Here in the UK, in the US, many of the countries, extroversion is seen as the ideal. And there is
Mm.
research that backs that up. Susan Cain, who wrote the book The Power of Introverts in a Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking, in 2012. She described it as the extrovert ideal. And that's why there's a widely held belief that the ideal self is alpha, gregarious, and comfortable being in the spotlight, which are typical extroverted characteristics. And historically, that has been what has been associated with being a great leader.
Hmm.
However, and then in the workplace, it's often the case of he or she who shouts the loudest, who makes the most noise, who's most visible, gets the recognition, they get the reward, and they get ahead. Whereas the quieter ones often get overlooked, but they have just as much value to offer. And I recognized that there was this bias towards introversion in the workplace, which not a lot of organizations focus on because, they may look at other inequalities in the workplace, such as gender or ethnicity or ability, disability. But when it came to personality characteristics, they don't. And a lot of work processes and systems are more favored towards extroversion. So, for example, meetings can be one of the most challenging environments for people who are introverted because the way that most meetings are conducted, they don't allow introverts to think and process the information as we like to, and then give a response. People are put on the response on the spot and expected to respond straight away.
What should an organization do with these introvert leaders to become more comfortable, with the spotlights?
Right. So a lot of people think it's about making the introverted people more extroverted, but it's not. It's about recognizing the strengths and the qualities that our introverts have. So understanding what introversion is can make it then easier to put things in place so that they can be their best selves. So recognizing that introversion is not a weakness, it's not an illness, it's not something that people need to get over. There are a lot of qualities and strengths in introversion, and it's recognizing that it's about how introverts are stimulated or overstimulated, how they're energized, how their preferences for deep thinking, reflection before speaking. So for example, in meetings, rather than thinking that if somebody's not speaking, it doesn't mean that it means that they've got nothing to contribute. Recognize that they could be just there thinking, absorbing everything, processing information. So it's about conducting meetings in a way that allows for the diversity of thinking styles that are in the room so that everybody can make a contribution. And it may be about adapting processes or adapting how you carry out meetings so that every voice is heard. Likewise, when it comes to interviews, recognizing that introverts like to process information and then express their thoughts, allowing for that in an interview. So making sure that they've got time to process the information. And an interview is meant to be getting the best out of the person so that you can identify who is the best person for the role. But if you're not making the interview inclusive for the diverse thinking styles, then some people are going to be disadvantaged more so than others.
Right. So tell me about your coaching now. I mean, how do you coach introvert leader? Talk to me a little about that.
So invariably, when someone comes to me for coaching, it may be because they have been in environments where they are extroverted environments, and what can happen is because of how society views introversion, people who are introverted can often think that there's something wrong with them, that the problem is them, not recognizing it's the environment. So they may have issues around their confidence or issues around experiencing imposter syndrome, around visibility, around speaking up or finding their voice. And so the first thing what I do is I coach them to have that belief in themselves, to recognize their introverted strengths, things like that deep reflection, things like being analytical, things like empathy. Introverts are known for being more empathetic, things like listening. Introverts are known for being good listeners. So recognizing those strengths, and those are all qualities that leaders need to have. And so once they're able to come to it from a place of strength, to accept themselves as they are, recognize their strengths,
Hmm.
then it's then easier to navigate those
Hmm.
external barriers.
Hmm. 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 And then what's next? So first is the recognition as a
Hmm.
strength, and then what happens
Yeah,
next?
so coaching them through any self-limiting beliefs that they may have had, or recognizing how those self-limiting beliefs have been shaped by their environment, or it could be their upbringing.
Hmm.
You know, I've had clients who,
Hmm.
well, one particular client who was the only one out of her siblings who was introverted. And as a child, she would be quite
Hmm.
happy to sit on her own, drawing, painting, doing creative stuff. Whereas her mum would always try and force her to be like her brothers and sisters. What happens is when children are not allowed to be themselves, um, then they can grow up doubting themselves or thinking that they're not good enough. And that was the case with her as an adult. She doubted herself. She didn't think she was good enough. She wasn't doing things that she knows she was more than she was capable of doing, because she didn't think that she was good enough. She thought that people would think that she wasn't good enough. And so it was about coaching her to recognize what had happened previously in her childhood, that her parents, her mum was probably doing what she thought best for her at that particular time based on her understanding and knowledge of the world. However,
Hmm.
we know now that how to raise up a child in a way that they can be their best confident selves, to have that self-efficacy and that belief in themselves, that we know that that is not necessarily the way to raise a child. And so getting to
Hmm.
understand that and accept who she was, identify what her
Hmm.
strengths were, identify what the limiting beliefs were, and how to using different coaching approaches that help someone to change what they think about themselves, and to recognize that they can't change what has
Hmm.
happened, but that what they can do is change how they respond in certain situations. And so
Hmm.
getting her to do that, she was then able to navigate the external, because one of the things that she was good at was writing. And she
Hmm.
was able to use her writing to make herself more visible, and that helped her in terms of her confidence and being visible and being able to self promote as well. So it'll depend on what each challenge is the person has. So invariably,
Hmm.
when they come to me for coaching, it may be something like they can't get promoted. It might be that they don't have the influence that they want to have. It might be that they're not confident speaking up or public speaking. It might be that they aren't as assertive as they would like to be, or they find it difficult making strategic decisions. And so we'll do that
Hmm.
inner
Hmm.
work, what I call that inner work, first before we work on the external barriers. And I have a saying that
Hmm.
goes, before you can lead others, you need to be able to lead yourself. And self-leadership is key.
Right.
And so by getting them to a place where they are leading themselves, they're able to regulate their emotions, they are have that self-awareness of how certain environments, certain situations affect how they feel, and also recognizing, having that self-awareness of how other people perceive them, and how and why other people respond to them the way that they do. And so once they've been able to develop in those areas, then looking at, well, what is it that they want to achieve, and how they can go about doing that, and working with them to achieve that.
Hmm. So, you know, I'll come to the barriers that you're speaking about, the external barriers that introvert leader will
Hmm.
have. This is interesting to hear. It's not at work a leader is expected to be extrovert, but even in families, and how that shapes up our thinking in the future,
Mm,
that I'm not good enough. It's so impactful. I mean, how even as parents, we need to know that everybody is different, and we should learn to allow children to be themselves, and see who they are, recognize that, and understand what are the strengths of being an introvert too.
that's right. Yes, and I'll give you two examples of this. One example, a woman told me that her 12-year-old, she was either 12 or 13-year-old, her daughter, had been marked down a grade at school because the only reason that was given was that she didn't put her hand up enough in the class. Now she knew her work. She was very intelligent, but they marked her down a grade at school, and she was really, really upset. And imagine what impact that is going to have on that girl as she becomes an adult. If she's told, or she's made to feel that she's not good enough because she doesn't put her hand up enough, then that is going to lead to her doubting herself. That's going to lead to her experiencing a lot of the challenges that the leaders that I coach experience. Another situation was a woman who had two children, a 7-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl. Her 7-year-old was extroverted and the 5-year-old daughter was introverted. When they went to family gatherings or family social events, her 7-year-old boy, he'd run away straight away and be playing with the other children, whereas her daughter, 5-year-old daughter, would cling to her because she didn't want to join in. And she said that one day she walked past the school and she noticed that her daughter was sat in the playground on her own. And so she became annoyed and she marched down to the school to have a go at the teacher, demanding to know why her daughter was on her own. And the teacher said to her, she's okay, she's happy. She's happy being on her own and she's also happy playing with other children. And when I said to her that, her daughter is introverted, and I asked her, how do you think if she's constantly being told that she needs to be more outgoing, she needs to be more like her brother, what impact do you think that will have on her as she grows up? And she recognized and realized that if she carries on like that her daughter is going to she's going to experience self-doubt. She's not going to have belief in herself. And she recognized that she needed to let her daughter be herself. Otherwise, she'd have experienced those self-limiting beliefs as she grew older.
And I think that's a story of every family, right? Every child is different, and one could be introvert and the other is extrovert, and that's how as a parent, I think we impose on our children our way of thinking and seeing what's better, and then not allowing our children to be ourselves. Great examples. Thank you, Carol. And you spoke a little bit about, you spoke earlier about psychological barrier for introverted leaders. Tell me about what are those psychological barriers that you were speaking about?
And these barriers are not just introverted leaders that experience these psychological barriers. A lot of leaders do, but it's something that's not often talked about. So if we take imposter syndrome, for example, and that's a form of chronic self-doubt and believing that you're going to get found out that you're not good enough. And invariably, when I do workshops and talks on imposter syndrome, and I do a poll, about 90% of people will say that they have experienced it at some time or another. And so it is very high. But a lot of people don't talk about their insecurities because they feel that it will be seen as a weakness, or they'll be made to think that they're not good enough. And I think if we had more conversations about experiencing these things, it would remove some of the stigma from it. It would make people, it would kind of normalize it in a way and take the pressure off people to think that there's something wrong with me. And I remember an interview with Howard Schultz, who was the former chair and CEO of Starbucks, the New York Times did with him. And he alluded to the fact that all CEOs experience it at some time or another. He said something along the lines that there's no CEO on his first day will say that he knows how to do everything, because it's a fact. That we don't have those conversations and people don't talk openly about their experiences of it. And when we do talk about it, it makes people feel that there isn't something wrong with me. I'm okay. I'm just having this experience. And I don't even like the term imposter syndrome because it's not a syndrome. It's an experience. I prefer to say imposter experience. And a lot of these limiting beliefs or the self-doubt or that affect confidence and abilities as leaders stem from either early childhood or early life experiences where we've either been made to feel insecure, that we're not good enough, or we may have been put on a pedestal and because we may have been brighter than our siblings or our peers, people have placed high expectations on us, and as a result, we felt that we can't live up to those expectations, and that's affected how we see ourselves, experiencing things like perfectionism, imposter syndrome. And when we experience those things, it can have an effect on how assertive we are or how influential we can be. I'll give you another example of one woman who, she recognized when she came to coaching, she recognized that what she was experiencing was as a result of her childhood experience. When she was about 12 years old, she'd done an exam at school, and she ran home excited because she'd got a B. And when she told her dad that she got a
Mm,
B, her dad said to her, "Why is it not an A?" And so that just
mm,
made her feel, you said that that just took all that confidence away from her. She had been happy because she got a B, but her dad had made her feel like she was rubbish because she didn't get an A. That led to her
mm,
experiencing perfectionism, imposter syndrome, right up until she was in her 50s.
mm,
And then that's when she came to coaching,
mm.
and she was able to recognize where that came from. And we were able to address that. So she felt, had that belief in herself and recognized that, yes, she is good enough. And we all experience it. I'm sure you probably experience it at some time or another.
Right. I'm thinking now how one recognizes that where is it coming from? Because sometimes it's you're in 40s,
Hmm.
30s, even later than that, and you're still living that thinking, which probably comes from your childhood. Is there a way people can recognize that?
Then it's about asking themselves, where does this belief come from? So when someone is faced with a situation where they're doubting themselves, where they're fearful, where they're lacking confidence, just asking themselves, what are my thoughts about this? And they don't always have to be able to
Mm,
pinpoint where it's coming from,
mm,
but it's about recognizing that it's the thinking that is affecting how you feel, which is affecting how you act and behave. Because
mm,
many of us are led by our
mm,
emotions, and for many of us, the way that we think affects how we feel, and we act and behave according to how we're feeling. And that's usually as a
mm,
result of what we think and believe about ourselves, or something that we need to do, or about other people, what they may think of us. That if we
mm,
just check what we're thinking, we can challenge what we think. Just because we think it, we don't need
mm,
doesn't mean that we have to believe it if it isn't true.
mm,
And so it's about making
mm,
that time for self-reflection so you can recognize when the thinking is getting in your way.
mm,
And some of us are just so
mm,
busy that we don't stop and think about our thoughts. We just let those negative voice come into the back of our head. Oh, you're not good enough. Oh, you're going
mm,
to fail at this. They're going to laugh at you. You're going to mess up.
mm,
And because we don't stop
mm.
and examine that thought, we just allow it, and we hold ourselves back from being all that we can be.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, I mean, I always say that if there's anything, if there's a negative feeling, there's always a negative thought attached to it. Think what is that thinking that is creating this feeling? Yeah, so maybe a moment of reflection, pausing for some time and reflecting on what is it bringing me to feel this way. Yeah,
Yeah, so
that I
we've been
asked you
talking
was.
about belonging and psychological safety. I sort of explained the difference between belonging and psychological safety. And then I talked about a couple of client experiences, how I got into the belonging and psychological safety.
So tell me a couple of findings through your research, for workplaces, belonging and safety, what's happening, how is this now post-COVID things are evolving,
Hmm.
especially work from home, all of that has, the way things are working, organizations are working have changed. And looking at and considering those dynamics, how difficult is it becoming now to really have employees and people feel belonging and safety at work?
I think it is the challenge at the moment. I think particularly with Generation Z, who,
Mm-hmm.
if you think, a lot of them entered the workplace during the pandemic, so during those times of the COVID environment. So they've not necessarily, some of them have joined where they're working from home all the time, or they may do a bit of hybrid working. And so they've not had that experience of forming those social connections at work, or forming those bonds at work.
Mm,
And we do see that with Generation Z, they experience higher levels of mental health challenges. And so I think leaders need to be mindful that when people feel like they belong and they feel psychologically safe, they thrive. My research showed that when my participants felt that they belonged and they felt psychologically safe, they were more creative, they were more
Mm.
innovative, they were more confident, they went the extra mile. But when they didn't feel like they belonged or they didn't feel psychologically safe, they it was like they shrunk. They would hold
Mm.
themselves back, they wouldn't give their best. And some of them, that was the reasons why they left the organization, because they didn't feel like they belonged and they didn't feel psychologically safe. So I think leaders do have a responsibility to ensure that they are creating workplace cultures and workplace environments where people do feel like they belong and they do feel psychologically safe.
Thank you. And Carol, some final questions. Is there a way to read more about your research and the book? Of course, would you like to share where is your book available? I'm sure Amazon, but anywhere else we can find. And how do we learn more about your work?
Right. So my book about belonging and psychological safety, I'm still writing it at the moment. And I'm also in the
Oh, yes.
process of having my research published as well. So they're not available yet. My previous book, Quietly Visible, Leading with Influence and Impact as an Introverted Woman, is available on Amazon. People can find me on my website, aboundingsolutions.com, or on
Mm-hmm.
LinkedIn. I'm quite active on LinkedIn, so they can
Yeah,
find me, Carol Stewart, on LinkedIn.
yeah, yeah. And of course, we're going to write these details down in our show notes so that people can access from there and click on your details and description and reach out to you. Any advice that you would have for introverted leaders, especially?
So for introverted leaders, don't think that you have to put on a persona. Don't think you have to act extroverted in order to get ahead. If you do that, it will gradually chip away at your self-confidence and your self-belief. Be yourself and show up as yourself. Recognize your introverted superpowers. I call them superpowers, and utilize your superpowers. And remember that introverts make great leaders too.
Hmm.
Be introvert and proud.
That's awesome. Carol, thank you so much for your time on this show today, and we're looking forward to catch up sometime soon.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for having me.